Yep. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, conference participants, welcome to this, our third plenary session. I would just point out we are being live streamed, so welcome to those of you online as well. After our speakers talk, we will have a question and answer session, and questions can also be posted online. I would like to introduce our speaker today. I'm so convinced I'm going to mispronounce your name, but anyway. Olesya Khromeychuk is a writer and a historian. She has published in, among other fine outlets, the New York Times, Der Spiegel, The Guardian, and even the New York Review of Books. In her many varying roles, she's, for instance, founded a theater company. She has written a very powerful, unflinching memoir, The Death of a Soldier as Told by His Sister. She is currently director of the Ukrainian London Institute. But above all, I think she is a uniquely powerful Ukrainian voice, and we are delighted to have her and welcome her today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for inviting me. Thank you all for being here today. I know this is your first post-lunch session, so I'll try and keep you awake. And thank you for making space to discuss Ukraine, to discuss Russia's war against Ukraine. What I propose to do in the next half an hour or so is to deliver something that I see as a provocation for discussion. Some lessons that maybe we can learn from Ukrainian experience that are applicable to the rest of us wherever we are in the world. And I'm very much looking forward to discussion. Are you ready for war? I'd like you to pause for a moment and really think about how you would answer that question. You might begin by breaking it down. What kind of war? Ready to do what exactly? And is the you meant to be you as an individual or as part of a collective? Let me suggest the most likely answer. No, you're not ready for war. Very few people are. Even those whose job it is to prepare for war on a daily basis often aren't truly ready until it begins in earnest. So while you stay present with that question, let's consider what someone like you or me, ordinary civilians, might need in order to be as ready as possible. In the days and weeks leading up to Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukrainians were sharing lists of what should go into an emergency bag, known in Ukrainian as tryvozhna valizka. The word tryvoha in Ukrainian means both anxiety and alert. For instance, повітряна тривога means air raid alert. So I'd like to think of the tryvozhna valizka as a bag that helps us package our anxiety in a way that helps us stay alert. One of the key rules for a successful emergency bag is that you must be able to carry it on your own. According to the State Emergency Services of Ukraine, it should not exceed 50 kilos, more generous than most budget airlines' cabin allowance. It's worth remembering that in a moment of crisis, if you need to move quickly, you can't afford to be weighed down by your luggage. And if you're fit and well, chances are you'll end up helping others carry their bag. That means that only the most essential items can be taken with you. To make the task of packing easier, I've grouped the recommended items into 5 categories: documents, first aid, basic food and water supplies, a survival kit, and money and a list of next of kin. Now that we worked out what needs to go into our emergency bag, I'd like you to take this mental exercise a little further. What if we consider not just our own survival, but also that of our community, of our region, or maybe even the planet? If we translate these 5 categories from physical items into broader concepts, they might look like this. Documents, proof of who you are, your passport, for instance, that's about identity. Your medical kit, for example, a tourniquet that can stop bleeding and give you a better chance of surviving injury, that's about resilience. Basic provisions to keep your body alive, that's sustenance. And your survival kit, candles, matches, batteries, paper, map, remember those? To navigate the terrain when GPS signal fails, that's about autonomy. And finally, your cash, bearing in mind that bank cards could be useless if basic systems and order collapse, and a list of key contacts. Again, mobile reception may well be down. That's about security. A simple rule for packing, which I picked up as a moderately keen hiker in my youth, is to play the heaviest items at the bottom of the bag and layer lighter items on top. This reduces the risk of toppling over and giving yourself a concussion before your journey even begins. So, identity, resilience, sustenance, autonomy, and security. Which shall we pack first? I suggest we begin with autonomy. It carries no small amount of weight. The very notion of keeping an emergency bag is bound up with securing one's own autonomy. At first glance, that might suggest a clash between the personal and the collective. What is autonomy if not self-reliance? Sharing a few meager possessions that you've managed to secure for a rainy day could well rob you of a better chance at survival. However, as Rebecca Solnit writes in her essay, The Ideology of Isolation, no one is wholly independent. You can't survive without taking air into your lungs you didn't give birth to or raise yourself. You won't bury yourself, and in between, you won't produce most of the goods and services you depend on to live. We're in it together, for better or worse. End of quote. And so, when it comes to gaining and keeping autonomy, and when it comes to growing it into independence, forgive me, we are better off working in concert with others. What kept Ukraine bound to Russia's imperial grip was the absence of autonomy, political, economic, cultural. What gave Ukraine the chance to slip out of that grip was an act of claiming autonomy. And what frightened the imperial center enough to unleash political violence was the sight of Ukrainians practicing autonomy. While individual voices, from poets to politicians, had long called for Ukrainian autonomy, it was the collective that made the independence real. I'm referring here to the too often overlooked referendum of the 1st of December 1991, which confirmed Ukraine's Declaration of Independence. The turnout was 84%, a level of political engagement that most 21st century politicians can only dream of. And of those who took part, over 90% said yes. And crucially, it wasn't just in some parts of Ukraine, it was all of Ukraine. Even Crimea, where more than 54% voted for independence. And this, at a time when the Crimean Tatars, the peninsula's indigenous people, persecuted and deported by Stalin, had only just begun to return home, had only just begun to imagine reclaiming their autonomy. And they imagined it as part of an independent Ukraine. In Donetsk, Luhansk, Odessa, Kharkiv, Kherson, regions that are habitually claimed by Moscow as part of its Russian world and that suffer from daily Russian bombardment today, in 1991, between 80 and 90% voted in favor of independence. In other parts of the country, the figure was between 95 and 98%. This page of recent history is all too conveniently forgotten by those who question Ukraine's ability to secure and defend its autonomy. Yet it is unambiguous proof that Ukrainians of every political, ethnic, or linguistic stripe were united in one thing: the desire to live in independent Ukraine. In 1991, that desire found expression in the simple act of picking up a pen. Over 3 decades later, the same goal compels people to pick up arms. Autonomy, then, is not about doing it alone. It is about being able to lean on others and let them lean on you in order to protect independence, both individual and collective. It is hard-won for many, and it is fragile for all. And when it is threatened, one must be ready to protect it. Which brings us to the next item for our emergency bag: resilience. resilience is not merely about surviving hardship. It is what allows you not only to stand up after a fall, but to keep going. It is forged in the crucible of difficulty, yet we should resist the temptation to romanticize it as something that gives meaning to suffering. Trauma leaves scars on both individuals and societies, and resilience may grow from those scars. But if wounds remain unhealed, they can reopen. True recovery becomes possible only when survival is paired with justice. Stanislav Aseyev's account of his time in Olesya, isolation, a Donetsk art gallery that was turned into a concentration camp by Russian proxies in 2014, brings the link between resilience and justice into sharp focus. A writer, journalist, and human rights activist, Aseyev endured inhumane conditions for 962 days. In his book, The Torture Camp on Paradise Street, he recounts the daily torments inflicted on him and his fellow inmates: electrocutions, beatings, torture, humiliation. He says that in order to write the book, he had to first survive. And in order to survive, writes Aseyev, I had to believe that I would write it. The will to testify, therefore, fueled Aseyev's resilience. He writes of justice, too, and it is hard to tell which passages carry more bitterness, those detailing the suffering or those acknowledging that the suffering was meted out with complete impunity. In this account of my time in isolation, writes Aseyev, I purposefully avoid using surnames or even first names. It would be cruel to name a survivor. For anyone who's been through that place, rape and torture, recognizing themselves in the book would only add to trauma. As for the perpetrators, they can keep their names until they face justice. I know none of them have repented. Every word I write is a joke to them. End of quote. The testimony of a survivor, a witness who can bring evidence into the court of law, can nurture resilience, but only if it is heard, validated, and acted upon by wider society. Collective indifference to one's suffering, on the other hand, can complete the work of the tormentor. The pursuit of justice, therefore, is essential in strengthening resilience, not only of those who suffered directly, but also those around them. So, we've now packed two bulky items: autonomy, which comes hand in hand with unity, and resilience, which draws its strength from justice. The next thing to consider is sustenance. This needs to be within easy reach in our emergency bags, and we must ensure that it doesn't spoil too quickly, because nourishment can swiftly turn into poison. If we think of sustenance at the level of a country, Ukraine, we must consider how its place in global food production has been compromised by Russia's war. Ukraine, the proverbial breadbasket of Europe, is one of the world's largest producers of wheat, maize, and barley. And until the full-scale Russian invasion, it was the largest exporter of sunflower oil, providing nearly half of the global supply. It holds a large percentage of the world's black earth, soil, chornozem, extraordinarily fertile and well-suited to crops. Ukraine's exports are critical for regions such as the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. And because of this, even small disruptions in Ukrainian food exports ripple outwards, pushing up global food prices and threatening some of the most vulnerable parts of the world with famine. As a result of Russia's invasion, Ukraine has become the most mined country on earth. Vast swathes of land are contaminated with mines and unexploded ordnance. Since February 2022, hundreds of civilians, including children, have been killed or maimed because of the mining. Agricultural workers are among the most exposed, as fields across east and south, in particular, are unsafe. And until this land can be cleared, Ukraine's role as a cornerstone of global food supply will remain uncertain. To meet this challenge, one of the largest demining operations in history is underway, supported by many countries. Modern technologies, drones, AI mapping, robotic deminers are being tested to speed up clearance. Yet even with such support, the task is likely to take decades. And it is not only farmland that is poisoned. Water supplies, too, have been compromised. Shelling and strikes on industrial sites, factories, refineries, fuel depots have released toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and waste into soil, air, and rivers. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in June 2023 remains the starkest case of an unfolding ecocide. The damage is not only immediate. Contaminated soil, unexploded ordnance, and polluted waters may blight agriculture for years to come. Ecosystems, already strained, may never recover without sustained restoration. And this cannot be faced by one nation alone. When the consequences of conflict and environmental damage cross borders, our response has to do the same. Global challenges demand global collaboration that goes beyond national interests. And this brings me to another item for our emergency bag: identity. 20th century nationalism brought immense suffering, particularly to national minorities and stateless peoples. In this context, expressions of national identity have taken on an air of radicalism, often serving to exclude those deemed not to belong. Yet national identity can also foster qualities essential for the survival of communities, such as resilience and autonomy. It is therefore hardly surprising that Russia's war targets not only Ukraine as a state, but the very notion of Ukrainian national identity. Nowhere is this more evident than in the attempt to erase the national identity of the younger generation. For more than a decade of Russia's assault on Ukraine, and especially in the last nearly 4 years, I have traveled across countries and continents, imploring audiences to care about the bloodiest and largest war on European soil since the Second World War. I have encountered genuine sympathy, but also a great deal of indifference. There are also usually those who are eager to tell me what's best for my country. For instance, that surrendering territories, haven't they belonged to Russia anyway once, is the price to pay for peace. Like a broken record, I reply that when they say territories, we Ukrainians hear homes and ancestral graves. When they speak of rare earth minerals, we think of fellow citizens, like my own brother, who have laid down their lives defending that land, and of those still living there, whose lives under occupation are reduced to mere existence. To abandon those people would be to condemn them to suffer the crimes that have been meticulously documented in every corner of Ukraine that has been subjected to Russian occupation. Too often, my words are dismissed as those of a traumatized Ukrainian, a grieving sister, overcome by emotion. But there is one truth that always stills the room: the mass abduction of Ukrainian children who are forcibly naturalized, subjected to coerced adoption or fostering, Russified, militarized, and stripped of their national identity. No one has yet dared to suggest that we ought to let Putin keep our children in exchange for peace. No one has argued that Ukrainian children somehow belong to the Russian nation. Estimates of the numbers of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia vary. Ukrainian authorities cite just under 20,000 identified cases, while the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale has tracked over 35,000. Everyone involved in the tracing of these children agrees that the true figures are far higher, obscured by Russia's attempts to cover up these abductions through forced naturalization, the issuing of new birth certificates with changed names, and the adoption of Ukrainian children by Russian families. Russia has even changed its constitution to simplify the naturalization process of Ukrainian children as Russian citizens, effectively erasing their true identities. Russification of groups perceived as subordinate is hardly new for the Kremlin. It is a centuries-old practice used by the Russian Empire, the USSR, and the modern Russian Federation. Now it is once again mobilized against Ukrainian stolen children, whose young lives were reduced to raw material to manage the population crisis in neo-imperial Russia. So to dismiss nationalism as no more than a construct is to dismiss the very identities that are being attacked and erased. To perceive borders as arbitrary is to ignore the lived reality of those who endure occupation, where the border between one's own country and that of the aggressor marks the line between relative safety and total danger. National identity is shaped by cultural imagination, but it is not imaginary. It is the vessel through which people assert their existence against those who deny it. Nor does it need to exist in opposition to identities that cross national lines. On the contrary, it is by respecting each other's distinct national identities and allowing for their complexity that we can build a shared identity based on values. And that brings me to the final item that must go into our emergency bag: security. There are those of us who feel a greater sense of security through membership in wider communities or structures, the EU, NATO, and other military and economic alliances, although increasingly our reliance on these institutions is being tested. Those of us who were never granted entry to such exclusive clubs have had to seek security elsewhere. For me, one of the most vital sources of security has always been culture. Rarely does a public talk I participate in go by without someone asking how to save Russia. No, I did not misspeak. Russia, not Ukraine. The assumption seems to be that the country of Pushkin, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky must somehow be rescued from the evil that has befallen it. The superficial engagement with Russian culture is insufficient to grasp that seeds of hatred of the other can be found within its works, but it is apparently enough to inspire readiness for a rescue mission. Equally, the lack of knowledge about Ukrainian culture, even a superficial understanding, has fostered indifference towards saving Ukrainian cultural heritage, which is being burnt in libraries, destroyed in archives, and buried under the rubble of bombed-out museums, theaters, galleries, and concert halls. This ignorance can keep us blind to the fact that over 240 Ukrainian creatives have perished since Russia's war. In Russia's war already. And with them, the unrealized works within which our fragmented identities might have found a true home. One such creative was Victoria Amelina, a novelist and poet. She became a war crimes investigator after the full-scale invasion because she believed that bearing witness is a form of administering justice and providing security, if not for her own generation, then at least for those who will come after her. She was killed in a targeted missile strike on a restaurant in Kramatorsk in 2023, where she was dining with fellow writers from Colombia, trying to broaden the knowledge of her culture beyond Ukrainian and even European borders, and thus strengthen its security potential. Perhaps to honor her legacy, next time we are tempted to pick up a tome by Pushkin or Dostoevsky, we could read a book by Amelina instead. Maybe we should even put it into our tryvozhna valizka. And so, our imaginary emergency bag is beginning to look rather full. And I hope that by now you feel a little more prepared to face any calamity with it at the ready. If we have packed it wisely, there should be still enough room for one small item, the one that might be more important than all the rest. The one that can remind us of the things that cannot be packed into a suitcase. The smell of home, the view from a familiar window, the sunlight spilling through the curtains first thing in the morning, the laughter in the room next door. As you consider what that item might be for you, let me share a passage from Victoria Amelina's Looking at Women, Looking at War, which was published posthumously. In this extract, she describes packing her bag and choosing what to bring. She was packing not for war, she was packing for holiday. Yet a holiday trip was meant to begin on the 17th of February 2022. And so she sensed that things might change and that she might not find a home as she had left it upon her return. So she chose to take something particularly precious, just in case. I have just bought my first gun in downtown Lviv. I've heard that everybody is capable of killing, and those who say they aren't just haven't met the right person yet. An armed stranger entering my country might just be the right person. My new gun lies, black and hazardous, on the bed among all my swimming suits and bright summer dresses. I might need it later when I come back, but not yet. Now I am going on a week-long vacation to Egypt. We'll come back to Ukraine on February 24th, and I'll start going to shooting practice, I explained to my son, who has been watching too much news for his age in the past few months, but isn't afraid of the invasion at all. I put the gun into a safe and our swimming suits into a suitcase. The invasion didn't happen yesterday, the 16th of February 2022, so I head out the door full of hope that it won't happen at all. After all, a full-scale Russian invasion has been rescheduled for the past 8 years, since 2014. Mom, when's the next time we're going to get invaded? My 10-year-old jokes, like many adults in Ukraine. At the last moment, I turn around and run to the bedroom. I step on a chair to reach the jewelry box on the higher shelf. What if Kharkiv, Kyiv, and even Lviv will soon look like the ruined Aleppo or Grozny? What do I take now if I'm not coming home, ever? Mom, we're going to miss the flight. I take one pendant, pleated with gold and silver, with little rubies embedded in it. I inherited it from my grandma, the only jewelry her mother had left her, and that's my oldest family relic. The great-grandmother who left it to us was born in Russia, somewhere on the Volga River. My Ukrainian grandmother and 2 Ukrainian grandfathers didn't have such old things. For them, everything was gone with the wind in the turmoil of the last century in Ukraine, the heart of bloodlands. I put the pendant with rubies on, as if it were my soldier's badge. End of quote. Thank you.
Take a seat. Take a glass of water and rest a moment.
I need it.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We've now, I think, about 45 minutes for discussion. So we will welcome questions and comments. I would just say briefly, do clarify in your own mind if it is a question or a comment. Do try to stay on message and try to keep brief, because I think there'll be many questions, so if we can keep them short and snappy. And also we have a facility for people to pose questions online as well. Maya will be taking care of that. And I think we can pass microphones among you as well. So are you now ready to already start taking questions?
Always ready.
Okay. Anyone like to begin?
And I welcome comments. Yeah, of course.
Yes, okay. Una, do you want 2 or 3 at a time?
It's up to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Una Bergman. I work at the University of Helsinki. I have a question. thinking about these days, the first days after the full-scale invasion, my family in Riga was preparing an apartment for Ukrainian refugees who were going to come. And in a similar way, how you were explaining what are the things that you put in an emergency bag, we were thinking, what are the things that we need to put in the apartment? So what is your advice? What are the things that one should think about when we think about welcoming a Ukrainian friend, colleague, among us?
What a beautiful question. Are we collecting?
Yes, there was one question right on front of Una. And if you could introduce yourselves as well when you pose your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olesya. Marina Shevtsova, Catholic University Leuven, but I'm from Dnipro. My family is in Dnipro, so thank you. You speak to the heart, of course. I wanted to ask you about your work. I mean, I've been following your work since earlier than full-scale invasion, and I can only imagine how difficult it is. So I wanted to ask you, what are now the main challenges you face when you advocate for Ukraine in the UK, and what helps you to go on?
Will there be a third question at this juncture? I think not.
Shall we begin?
Yes,
yeah.
Please.
Thank you for those wonderful questions. What to prepare in the apartment? Wow, what a thoughtful way to begin this discussion. I mean, I assume you don't mean practically speaking. I guess we've moved on. I would say the key thing we should all prepare and maintain, because it's really difficult. I think it was there in 2022, but it's very difficult to maintain, is solidarity. It's partly related to your question as well, the main challenges. Solidarity can't be abstract, it has to be rooted in something concrete. And one of the main challenges is to remind the audiences in parts of the world yet seemingly unaffected by Russia's war. And I'm saying seemingly because I live in Britain and it is affected by Russia's war. It's just, it's possible to still be oblivious to the effect and continue life as normal, is to explain why it matters, why people should stay alert, why people should care. It's human nature not to stay alert to difficult, violent news from different parts of the world. The media has made it difficult to keep several conflict zones in mind at the same time. I am absolutely confident we're all capable of it, but somehow I think some of media outlets don't think we are. So yeah, reminding people that this matters and explaining why it matters is more challenging now than it was before. And I think that goes back to how we prepare. I think if we remind those who are affected by the war, and in this case we're talking about Ukrainians, but it could be people from other parts of the world that are escaping conflict, is to say we care and to explain why we care. We're invested, we're emotionally invested, we're invested on the level of, on practical level, but also on emotional level. You could, and this is kind of related to a more practical way of preparing your so-called apartment, is to have a Ukraine shelf, is to have a Ukraine shelf in your bookstores, in your libraries, in your homes, a place where you can go to get updated knowledge on Ukraine, because I think it's still not a given that Ukraine shelf within our, is on our mental maps and is on our mental libraries. I think it's still lacking. One way we deal with it, I'm combining the two questions, forgive me, I'm looking at both of you at the same time. One way we deal with these challenges at the Ukrainian Institute London is by trying to make Ukraine relevant to our audiences. So, for instance, when we talk about ecocide, we make sure that it's a discussion with people from experiences from other parts of the world that are also going through ecocide. And we're looking for, we're offering lessons from Ukraine, good and bad, and we're looking for collective solutions together. And Ukraine has so much to offer in terms of lessons for global challenges that all of us are facing. And that works. Creating that dialogue of equals works. It's not always easy to maintain that dialogue of equals. We can see how the sort of, what we assume to be a new truth, that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, can very quickly disappear off political agenda. We saw that earlier this year, and we keep seeing it. It's a very fragile new reality. So it's very important to build platforms for that dialogue of equals. And in terms of what keeps me going, I mean, mostly survivor's guilt. It's knowing that I'm not working from a bomb shelter, that even simple things like, that I can visit my brother's grave, whereas a lot of soldiers and civilians, soldiers are missing in action, and civilians don't have graves that are, on occupied territories or in mass graves, and people, their relatives can't go and mourn. The blessings that we count have become very odd, but they are blessings nevertheless, and I think they act as a type of fuel for those of us who can still keep going. And when I go to Ukraine and I see how exhausted my friends and colleagues are, and then they have no choice but to keep going, I remember that if I do a little bit more, maybe they can take a short break. And yeah, that gives me strength.
Would we have, yes, John?
From the Alexander Institute.
Hello, John.
You travel a lot and you see a lot of the communities, Ukrainian communities abroad. I follow, living in central Finland in a small village of 5,500 people, we have about 50 Ukrainian families. And it's interesting to see how they integrate. The one problem of integration that we find is that the older generation, they would speak, obviously, Ukrainian, Russian. Very few of them, in fact, we have one who speaks English. All right, you get some of the younger generation, then they've learned basic English. So you have between the community and the Ukrainian community and the Finnish community, you have a communication problem. Irrespective of this, the Ukrainians try to, it wasn't in your bag of necessaries, but there's a cultural memory. So they're very happy to sing and sing Ukrainian songs. And even I sung one for them. Then they do a lot of cooking. This is another thing which they can then bring to the community, something new. So amongst themselves, they develop their own community, and then through these little efforts, they're making contact within the village. I mean, how do you find, I mean, you see Ukrainian refugees in big cities and probably smaller communities. How do you find this question developing? Or what's your view?
Sure. So we have another question over here.
Stand up so I can see you. Thank you so much for your talk. I have a question concerning strategy to keep solidarity up. Because in your presentation, the toolkit seems to be quite set. not very flexible. And I'm wondering, and now I'm speaking on the basis of my reading of the Norwegian terrain, which is the society I live in, because I think the part of the toolkit, which is, latching the cancellation of classical Russian culture into the fight, I think that's the part of the toolkit which is not convincing in a Norwegian audience. So I was wondering about the thinking. Is there going forward where it might be more difficult to keep up the solidarity from different societies? Are there parts of, the toolkit or the story of how this fight can be waged, which you would consider being a bit more flexible on for strategic reasons?
Can you just please clarify a bit about Russian culture so I understand what you're asking?
It's that in Norwegian society, there is enormous sympathy for the Ukrainian cause, and I think people draw parallels. So Norway was occupied during the Second World War. We're a small country. We're easily, people easily identify. But the fact that being solidarical, if you can say that, with Ukraine, that would imply a necessity to, in a way, shame and ban what Norwegians associate with Russian culture, books, music, etc. That is part of the solidarity chain which doesn't resonate. People don't think it's useful. They want to create a distance between the Putin regime, the war that's going on, and Russian culture, and I think, Russian people. So from me, my side, if I were to give you kind of a piece of advice on strategy, at least in Norwegian society, I would, in a way, focus less on attempts to cancel, for example, in Norway, an opera at the opera house with Russian music,
And have there been cancellations of?
There has been protests and even arrangement of debates.
Debates, but cancellations?
No, but there is. But that's the fact, right? That it's a matter of creating solidarity with your fight. So I'm just kind of pointing out that in the Norwegian setting, that's where I think there is less of sympathy. If we compare to the beginning of the war, for example. I don't know. I can't answer you as straight, have there been cancellations, because I don't know. But this one part of the opera, I noticed, the opera.
Thank you. Those are
I think
two
we'll go
large
with
questions.
those two large
Maybe
questions. Take your time with that, yes.
Thank you. John, thanks for that question. It's huge. I've lived in the UK for 25 years, so I've seen diaspora politics, if I can call it so, evolve greatly. So when I came to Britain in 2000, I was Ukrainian from Ukraine, Ukrainka z України. That's how the existing diaspora perceived me. And of course, now we've got new Ukrainians from Ukraine, and people like myself are known to have referred to them in the same way. So there are waves of Ukrainian diaspora which have all found their feet in their own way and managed their identity maintenance versus integration, or sometimes assimilation, especially of the next generation, in their own ways. And those who arrived in 2022, on the one hand, they already have some infrastructure to practice their Ukrainian identity, but on the other hand, they need their own infrastructure. They need their own societies and clubs and organizations and whatnot. And they are building those. And it's wonderful to see lots of new organizations coming into existence and people coming together to have some kind of feeling of home away from home. The other thing that is a very nice development that I observed in 2014, and it hasn't really changed significantly since, is all of these different waves of Ukrainian diaspora coming together. There were tensions before, and I think that's normal. It's like that probably in all diaspora communities. But they all came together because we had a shared goal, and the goal was to do everything in our power to help keep Ukrainian statehood and build that solidarity among our host community. But what you're describing is a question I can't answer. It's a huge dilemma where I see, young children already switching to English and beginning to forget Ukrainian, and I see their parents maybe still struggling to switch to English, and there's a communication breakdown between in the same family. We need to invest. We need to invest in infrastructure for refugee communities, and we don't do it. And unfortunately, the trajectory all over Europe, including the UK, is not very promising. There are cuts to everything. There are cuts to basic English language provisions, not to mention infrastructure for refugee communities or for migrant communities. We use these words like illegal migrants. It's not illegal to be a migrant. You might be undocumented or semi-documented, but you're not illegal. But yeah, I'm very. It's very anxiety-inducing to see the way the discussion around these issues is evolving in the whole of Europe, and of course beyond Europe as well. There's also this kind of feeling of being suspended among Ukrainians, that they know they are being temporarily allowed into yet safe countries of Europe. They are not promised any kind of settlement. And so on the one hand, they need to settle because, a lot of children go to school and you begin to rebuild your life somehow. On the other hand, they understand this tension from the state, and I'm here talking about the UK in particular, where there is no promise of any permanent settlement. And they also, vast majority of them want to return. But the question is, do they have somewhere to return? Because their homes might be in occupied territories, might be entirely destroyed. And also, is it, how safe is it to return? Those who chose to return, returned, of course, and I see more and more people go back to Ukraine, but some remain. So it's an extremely multi-layered, very complex question, but thank you for raising it, and I'd love to hear other experiences too. Okay, let's try and tackle this one. I feel like there were several questions there. Let me begin with banning Russian culture. There's been so much discussion about the so-called cancelling of Russian culture over the last 4 years, or nearly 4 years. And yet, I'm yet to see these cancelled cultural products. That's why I asked you whether you know of any specific examples of when a theater production or an opera or a cultural event was actually cancelled, other than Gergiev. And here, let's not mix Putin's friend with Russian culture. It was cancelled because he's Putin's mate, not because he's Russian and he's spreading the word about Russia. I see on my cultural radar in London endless productions of Cherry Orchard and Uncle Vanya. I don't know why we need another Uncle Vanya, but we get one every couple of years. There's Netrebko singing in London Opera in spite of all of the protests, and this is a highly problematic diva with clear connections to Russia and to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. There is Eugene Onegin that has been advertised to me. So most of the literary festivals had Navalnaya speak as a keynote speaker this year because her book came out. So I think there's a great fear that often comes from certain groups of Russian society about the banning of Russian culture. But I haven't seen a lot of evidence of it actually happening. Now, I am of persuasion of talking less about Russia and talking a lot more about those countries that Russia has overshadowed and cultures that Russia has overshadowed for centuries. And that is why, in my talk, I said, next time you reach out for a tome by Pushkin, consider picking up Amelina instead. Consider broadening your cultural horizons. Consider learning something from the subaltern and not the imperial. It'll do us all a lot of good. And that might actually contribute to solidarity a lot more. And your question was about strategy for solidarity. When we read each other's anti-imperial works, we can find connections for very strong solidarity. If we get to know each other better, not via some imperial center. It's enough that we read each other's work in imperial languages. I write in English, and it's easier to publish in English. It's enough that we already resort to imperial tools. Let's discover each other's culture and build solidarity that way.
Yes, we have two more questions. One, yep, at the back, and then...
Yes, hello. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I'm Gary Flicke. I'm from the University of Oslo. I first have a comment to make that we just last week had a very successful Ukraine conference in Bergen in Norway.
I know.
Where we gathered more than 100 scholars and talking about the topics of Ukraine and the history of Ukraine. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the not-so-visible guilt complex in Europe. And that guilt complex is something that I am also a part of. We are guilty of having ignored Ukraine. And I have to say this because when I was at the Institute of International Affairs in Norway, I wanted to do more Ukraine studies. I was actually at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy for some years and teaching there. But I also saw that in the Norwegian context, interest for Ukraine was relatively low. It was really hard to mobilize interest for Ukraine as a separate study. So that was sort of a first awakening call for me to try to see things a bit more differently. When I took my degree in the Russian language, I was studying the liberals of the 1905 revolution. But I have since then discovered, among other things, by reading the excellent book of Eugene Finkel, Intent to Destroy, that the Russian liberals were imperialists during the First World War, and they wanted to conquer everything that was Ukrainian and go all the way to Galicia and up to the borders of Poland and say that this is not Ukraine, this is Russia. So again, I think we have a massive adjustment to make in our heads and our readings of history. And I think, unfortunately, that should have started in 2014, or even in 2013, or perhaps even in 2004. So please accept my apologies. You know that you have lots of supporters. To the question, and this is basically because I was leading a panel on EU-Ukraine in the Ukraine-Net conference in Bergen. The question is, of course, the EU as a strategic actor after 2022. Everybody knows that the EU has really become awake to Ukraine. It's really doing a lot in order to help Ukraine access. But there are issues. So my question to you is, what can the EU do differently? Thank you.
Thank you.
We had another question. Just ahead. Yes.
I have a little comment on our Norwegian colleague and your remark. So on the one hand, you said that Norwegian society can't accept, can't understand the total ban of Russian culture. They keep memory about Russian contribute in the Second World War, so on, so on. So it's understandable. But on the other hand, it seems to me Norwegians don't mind about canceling Israel and Jewish culture. Is it difference for Norwegians? Maybe it's something like selective memory.
Yes, I think we'll... Yes, we will allow you a reply, but for now.
Super, thank you. I'll I'm going to briefly respond to your comment and then the question. Thank you for that fantastic conference in Bergen. I watched two exceptionally wonderful keynotes, because I could do so online from the comfort of my home, and I saw the program. It was absolutely amazing. Guilt. Well, I know it's not very healthy, and my therapist would probably not be happy if she heard me say this, but guilt is a motivational factor. If we feel a sense of guilt for something that we've done wrongly, it's likely that we might start doing it correctly if we act on it. What I lack is recognition on a political level, recognition of how we've facilitated the escalation of the war in 2022. By we, I mean the so-called democratic international community, especially, well, the global north, the west, those who continued working with Russia, who pretended that Crimea didn't happen, who allowed Putin to benefit from his war crimes that he was committing in Ukraine. There hasn't been any reckoning at all on the political level. There hasn't been any sort of admission to the fact that, yeah, we contributed to this becoming a reality in 2022. And I think if that had happened, maybe we would have fewer conversations about surrendering territories and making some kind of arrangements for ceasefire. We're not talking about peace. Russia's not interested in peace, but even ceasefire based on Putin's terms, because we would realize that such things will facilitate the next wave of escalation. That hasn't happened. And in terms of lack of interest in Ukrainian studies in academia, academia is a highly rigid and extremely bureaucratic thing. It takes a long time to change. On a good day, I see the changes and I appreciate them, and especially those people who are dedicating their careers to making those changes happen, and that's both Ukraine scholars and some Russianists who have been interested in the region, broadly speaking, and not just through sort of Moscow-centric approach, even before 2024. On a bad day, I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. This assumption that there's no market for Ukrainian modules, for instance, I heard it when I was teaching for years and years and years. Okay, so now at the Ukrainian Institute, we run courses in Ukrainian literature, culture, cinema, and about to start one in history. Actually, Finkel is going to teach on it among other people. And each time we have between 40 and 80 students who enroll on these courses. And we do not give any university credits for these courses. This is people who pay for a course simply to learn. And most of them have some kind of academic affiliation. They are mostly scholars of the region who simply don't have anywhere else to turn to learn about Ukraine and fill the gaps in their knowledge. So the next time somebody tells you that there is no market for Ukrainian modules, please direct them to our website and say there is. There's empirical evidence, which we love in academia so much. Okay, to your question, I'm not sure if I can answer it in any depth, but what can EU do differently? I think the EU, first and foremost, has to get its own act together. It has to secure its own defense. It has to embrace its agency as a collective, as well as individual countries. Both go hand in hand. It has to, if you want, pack its own emergency bag. And the good news, I think, is that European politicians still do listen to their citizens. So we need to embrace our agency and put pressure on them to do the same.
You wanted a quick counter-comment to the question.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify my position, because I was not being an agent here. I was simply pointing out to some trends which I can see in Norwegian society, which also means that your comment is correct. So my question was actually how you strategize, because whether you like it or not, it's a matter for the future, right? To keep these audiences in solidarity with your fight. So that's why I was offering this observation, that this might be a part where you're losing some parts of the audience. And in the Norwegian context, I agree with Geir. There is a lot of focus now on Ukraine among scholars and in educated milieux, but among regular people, I would not say that there's this commitment to Ukraine. And after all, regular people are going to vote, right? So that was my question, how you, in a way, strategize to keep audiences around Europe, because I think that's going to be crucial. And I think it's important to be realistic about how Ukraine kind of fights for attention. So just to clarify what kind of question it was.
And I think I answered that question, so maybe
yes,
we could take some more. On.
We have a question here, and we have two, in fact, yes.
Thank you so much, Yulia Kornishova. I'm here in Alexander Institute, but originally I'm from Kiev. Great presentation. I want to a little bit expand our discussion and bring Palestine-Israel conflict into the discussion. For some time, Ukraine and Gaza were put in the same basket. But starting from recently, I personally observe that those two cases are in a sort of competition because of their trauma, because of their existential experience. So my question is, how do you see it from being stationed in UK, in London? Do you see any difference in the attitude to Ukraine and to Gaza? How you would describe this difference, if any? And yeah, maybe to add maybe some of your observations regarding normative moral questions to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had another question in the back. We have two questions, three in the back row, but maybe we'll just take another one now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll take the first.
Thank you very much. Lina Klemenko, University of Helsinki, Center of European Studies. Well, thank you so much, Olesya, for a wonderful talk. It's fascinating to see how you have developed as a person and how you developed your profession. I remember you from any kind of memory conferences. I also participated myself. So it's a wonderful development, and I'm really glad to see it. My question is about Russian colleagues we are working with. I think many of us, Ukrainians, Ukrainians from Ukraine, Ukrainians from diaspora, different kinds of Ukrainians found ourselves in a difficult situation with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And I think we still have difficulties to deal with Russian colleagues. There is no one type of a Russian colleague. Of course, there is a diversity among people who come from Russia originally, or people from Russian diaspora, people who speak Russian language, and so on and so on. But I think there is still a challenge for us of how to deal with these people. So my question is, if you would find yourself in this situation working at an academic department or university with Russian colleagues, what kind of a Russian colleague would you wish for yourself? Thank you.
Easy questions. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think we'll have to go with these two now, and we've a little over 10 minutes left. Okay. And then we do still have two more questions, and hopefully we'll get to everybody then. So
you're just trying to save me here by encouraging me to give short answers. I'll do my best. I noticed this competition of suffering only in the media, I have to say. And there was, after the 7th of October, and there was this, my inbox got bombarded by various editors asking me to do an op-ed on what's it like to compete for attention. And I refused to write. And I know a lot of Ukrainian colleagues refuse to engage in those kind of discussions because there is no competition of suffering. Suffering is suffering. And like I said earlier, that's what I was referring to earlier. You know, we should be able to hold more than one conflict zone in our hearts and in our minds and in our intellectual discussions. what I also noticed is that there's mutual ignorance about each other's experiences. We don't do enough comparative work that goes beyond our immediate regions, both in academia and beyond. And when that comparative work is facilitated, I see solidarity. I'll give you an example. I was asked to participate in a discussion in the London Library where I spoke about Ukraine, a Palestinian writer spoke about Palestine, and a Sudanese writer spoke about Sudan. And we all read from our own books, and we could have been reading from each other's books. And it also happened so that each one of us on the panel lost a loved one in our respective wars. And the audience who came to hear us all came to hear different, some came to hear something about Ukraine, some came to hear something about Palestine and Sudan and so on. But they heard all of it, and they were able to do that comparative homework themselves as well. And that was extremely powerful. And I think such discussions help us navigate this push towards competition of suffering. Russian colleagues. Well, okay, so short answer, I am not in that position by choice. I have liberated myself from academia a little while ago. So I hesitate to put myself in your shoes, but I'll give you a slightly different answer based on my own experience. I have found myself on panels with Russian speakers because the organizers, especially early on in full-scale war, because the organizers hadn't warned me that that would be the case. And then I took a decision to avoid sharing platforms with Russian speakers, and I'll tell you why. Because in most cases, well, first of all, those people who are in Ukraine and make a very firm choice not to share platforms and not to speak even in the same events as Russian speakers have very good reasons to make that choice. Those of us outside of Ukraine sometimes find it harder to be so firm in our choices. But the reason why I try to avoid sharing platform with Russian speakers is because the conversation very quickly turns into a conversation about Russia and not about Ukraine. What I was hinting at earlier in my talk, how to save Russia, about Russian victimhood, and so on. And I'm not saying these are not valid conversations to be had. I just don't want the conversation about Ukraine to be hijacked by them. And that often is the case. And in terms of a perfect colleague, I sort of tried to develop a definition of a good Russian for myself. And I have met a few over the last 4 years. Sadly, their number seems to prove that they're exception that proves the rule. But it's basically someone who accepts complicity for the crimes that are being committed in the name of the Russian nation, simply through sheer association with that citizenship. If that's the basis with which they come and offer potential dialogue, then I think we could consider potential dialogue. And forgive me if I didn't answer your question directly.
Five minutes, 2 questions. Can we do this? They'll have to be super concise.
My name is Maria Harmas. I represent a Polish organization. Actually, my question is to you, Olesya. Thank you very much for your very important talk. Well, from Polish perspective, we see that on the 4th year on war, solidarity is fading in the society. not only in Poland, but in other countries, populistic governments take power. Recently, the president, who is rather anti-migrant, came to power. And anti-Ukrainian most probably. Well, we do not know for sure.
This is becoming a lengthy question,
yeah.
so if we can.
Well, the legislation has been tightened to show that the government is rather not welcoming agency of Ukrainian people living in Poland. It is over 1 million. What would you recommend the Ukrainian community how to prepare for this challenge, to face this challenge, maybe in Poland, maybe beyond too?
And one final question.
Thank you. Speaking of guilt and anti-immigrant sentiments, I'm asking from an American, United States of America context about, I think we are facing the same thing with the competition between Palestine and Ukraine for our attention. Unfortunately, it is broadly that Americans seem to not care about either. And so I was wondering if you would have any different advice for kind of bridging these two major issues in an American context, if it's any different. And if it's not any different, you can just say no. And that's very quick. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant questions. I don't have advice for Ukrainian community in Poland because I mean I don't live there and I don't know it in enough depth to offer advice. I do, however, find it very encouraging that in London we can work with Polish communities very successfully. A variety of communities, because like Ukrainian diaspora, that's also a very diverse community, in spite of these challenges. And actually when I hear very uncomfortable developments from Poland, how the attitudes towards Ukrainians is changing, I also try and remind myself that it's fascinating that the solidarity lasted this long and that the Russians didn't manage to damage it in the early stages or earlier, because that was my big fear in 2022. I was thinking, oh my God, so many Ukrainians, such complicated history between us, between Ukrainians and Poles. Surely the Russians are going to use this as perfect fertile ground for some kind of FSB information operations. And I'm sure they did try, but clearly they failed. And that gives me hope that we can overcome this. I would like to think that these changes in attitudes are also not just because of the duration of the war, but also a fallout of the recent election campaign, and that that's going to subside, and people are going to focus on the reality of the situation that, you know, if Ukraine falls, Poland is definitely one of the first to be next in line. There will be no buffer zone that Ukraine has been used as for so long. They will be on the front line, and so it's in the interest of Polish society to ensure that Ukraine doesn't fall and to support them as much as possible. And this sort of relates to the last question as well. I think we have so much to build dialogue on. We have so many things that we can discuss that go beyond our immediate interests, national interests, and address, again, something that I was trying to mention earlier, and address global challenges. Challenge of democracy. I mean, democracy is in crisis wherever we look, and it is in crisis in the United States of America. We can look at each other's experiences and see see how we can learn from the past, how we can learn from Ukraine on how civil society ensures that democracy remains in safe hands. I mean, look at the summer protests in Ukraine. Whenever people, doubt the health of democracy in Ukraine because we've not had elections for some time because of Russia's war that is preventing us from holding elections, I say to them, but when something didn't feel right, people took to the streets in the middle of the war to defend those institutions that they care about. They practice democracy, on a daily basis. We can learn from each other, and we need to build those bridges, I think, for instance, between different civil societies in different countries, human rights activists in different different countries. We just recently hosted Stanislav Aseyev, whom I quoted, but also Maxim Butkevich, another human rights defender, journalist who was Ukrainian POW for 2 years. He was in Ukrainian armed forces and he was taken prisoner and came out last October. And it was amazing to hear them speak in London and how it resonated with people who came to listen to them who are not necessarily part of the Ukrainian community or that experience, because they were talking about abuses of human rights and legality and how it's important to protect these institutions. So there's plenty for us to build our solidarity around and not drift apart, but actually come together.
And on that resonant and hopeful note, we're done with our time now. I'd like to thank our assistants here at the Think Corner. I'd like to thank our own assistants from the Institute for helping us out today. I'd like to thank everyone who had questions and comments, those of you who came to listen, but above all, a huge round of applause to Olesya for a marvelous talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.